Today I'm joined by Dr. Laurence Brock, who had a near-death experience following a car accident in 1976. During this experience, he came out of his body and he started on a long spiritual awakening. When he woke up 3 days later in hospital, he had healing abilities and life became about connecting with Source and to serve others. Today, Laurence has a doctorate in spiritual science and is helping others to heal. So Dr. Laurence Brock, welcome to Let's Talk Near Death. It's fantastic to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about your near-death experience. How did this all come to be? How did this take place?
Well, I was in my early 20s. I was living in Longmont, Colorado in the United States. And I came back east to visit my parents. I drove back with a friend of mine who also grew up in the area I grew up in, and we went to a party that night, and I was drinking and doing other mind-altering substances, and it's kind of funny in a strange way because the girl who was having the party I thought was kind of cute, and I was a little drunk, and I felt like, I sort of stretched it, saying I couldn't drive so I could leave my car there, mostly so I could go back the next day and talk to the girl who was having the party. In the meanwhile, I got a little bit higher without really thinking about it, and so almost back to my parents' house, I realized my sister needed the car the next day. So I went back to the party to get the car, and I remember leaving the party, but I don't remember anything after that until I was out of my body. So apparently I'd crashed into a tree, and I was out of my body looking down. My body was against the tree. There was a policeman leaning over me. I assumed he took me out of the car, but I didn't see that part of it. It was more of a kinesthetic experience where I just felt this wonderful energy and love, and just like it just seemed like everything was so all right in a way, like everything was all right, and it seemed like there was just a connection and a knowing. I'm still, all these years later, I'm trying to figure out the exact words to explain it. And it's funny, but when I say that to people, they go, oh, they get it, because it's too big to really explain. After there was a lot of white light. I was all in the white light. Behind me, my sense, I didn't look that way, but behind me there was a giant being, and then like a little being. And the little being said to me, you have to go back. Your father wants you to stay. And without thinking about it, because everything was perfectly fine, I went back into my body and then woke up 3 days later in the hospital. I do remember very specifically the nurse saying to me it was touch and go. I assumed I was very close to dying, and the neurologist, I still remember the look on his face, because he had this impish look on his face. He was smiling, saying, you are lucky. And, like indicating you're lucky that that you made it. In those days, patients' rights were very different. So the doctor didn't tell my parents anything, didn't tell me anything about what happened really, except for that I needed to go see the neurologist from time to time for a while to be checked on.
Wow, what an experience. Are you okay today?
My body, luckily, my genetics are really good and I'm very healthy, but there are things, people don't notice it, but if you look closely, there's a scar that goes all the way back to my head. Luckily, being a man, having a scar like that, it sort of just blends in. And but on the last few years, I've noticed along that line, there's tender spots, and I had never noticed it before that. I also tend to get problems on the right side of my body, which was definitely more damaged during the accident. I don't know if it's related, but it seems like it is to me.
So the near-death experience, you're in the car accident. You don't know that you've had a car accident. So your first memory is being in the white light looking down on your body. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's an interesting thing because you're looking at your body, but were you aware that was you? How connected to what was going on were you?
I knew that it was me, but it wasn't like, oh, even though I saw my head and the car was smashed, I didn't feel at all like anything was wrong. It was just like everything was okay, in perfect order. Looking at it from a very spiritual perspective, everything was fine.
Yeah, wow. And were you afraid at all?
No, like
No.
just imagine everything, every worry not there, every concern about anything, just understanding every little thing. I I really liked math, and I still do, but it was sort of like just the perfect math equation where everything was in the proper order, and the universe was fine, the world was fine, everyone was good.
I love this.
Yeah,
I had a very similar experience with my one, that I felt like everything was perfect, everything
yeah,
was great, and yet when you looked at the situation, there was very
right.
little, like on a human point of view, there
Right.
wasn't a whole lot that was great. But I was
Yeah.
like, everything is perfect. This is just ideal, because I feel along knowing that this was part of my life, what I had to go through. So did you feel a part of that as well? That this was part of a plan, a bigger picture, and that everything was okay and this was meant to happen?
Um, Not really. It's almost like what you're like to me. It was even sort of beyond that. Like there didn't need to be a plan. And you're asking about that. It was just like everything is good. There's almost like there's nothing else. And it's funny because uh, I want to say a few months ago, but I think it was last winter, a friend of mine who had been sick for a long time passed away. And um, I knew her from the time she was very young, and I was really good friends with her brother growing up. And I wasn't really going to go visit her in the hospital because I had seen her many times when she had been sick before she was in the hospital. But my plans just worked out. My daughter wanted to go. It was in Brooklyn, outside of New York City. My daughter wanted to go see a show with with kids and some other grown-ups, and I didn't want to go, so I took her into Manhattan, and I had a few hours, and it just worked out. Oh, I could take the subway to Brooklyn and go see this woman. And it was pretty interesting because I could see how it was, the spiritual part where it was really perfect. But everyone else around her was like almost willing her to stay alive, and she was like afraid. And she was very weak, and her mother didn't want me to stay there because there was only a certain amount of passes in the hospital. So her mother wanted all relatives to be there. But from this place of like barely being able to move, she grabbed my arm and said, "Stay," and just wanted me to stay there with her. And during that time, she just became peaceful inside about basically transitioning to that, better place. And it was kind of cool. And then, yes, she definitely passed away from the physical level that, later that day. And a friend of ours said she had seen her that day and said, "Oh, she's really doing bad." And I said, "No, she's really doing good. She's really getting ready to transition." And it was such an honor to be able to be there. And she asked me to work on her, do some of the energy healing I do. And then she sort of fell asleep, and I could just see, that part, her soul starting to, basically leave her body and everything. So it was great. Again, there's part of it that's, who am I? It's, you shouldn't be smiling or happy about stuff like that. But, there's the spiritual part that's really quite magnificent and majestic. And like, I can't even put my arms out enough to say how big and wonderful it is, So.
Yeah, oh, that's beautiful. Gosh, that opens up so many segues that we could go down. So when you woke up 3 days later in the hospital, you had these abilities. Were they anything that you were aware of beforehand? And can you tell us a little bit about what they involve and what they entail?
I was aware of some of it beforehand. And even after, it wasn't like nowadays people have a reference for what it is. Like you can look online. I had never even heard of a near-death experience. And back then, I really wouldn't tell anyone, or pretty much anyone, what I experienced. But so I had some things. The one thing I know that happened, and sometimes I wonder if I see other beings around and I don't even notice it because sometimes they look so real, so physical. but I saw my grandfather in a movie a couple of years before my near-death experience, and I know he had passed away. I know he was, I knew he wasn't alive physically. So, and he was a unique-looking person. I had other things where my intuition was, I just have a sense of knowing things about people, but I often say I was just kind of naive about it because when I was very young, I sort of assumed everyone was like that. As I got older, I didn't even think of it, and sometimes I know things more than the person themselves. Like I can see, people are in touch with different parts of their consciousness, and sometimes they're not in touch with their unconscious or their subconscious. So it was a slow discovery. I just started discovering more things that I was doing. One, I noticed my hands became warm when I would touch people. And anytime I tried to help someone feel better physically, it happened very quickly. One time I told, actually, my next door neighbor I was friends with, his grandfather was very sick. And I told this guy's father, I said, I'll pray for him. And I did, and I felt something happen. And I felt something happen. And then when I saw the father after that, a little while later, he said, I think something happened when you prayed, because that day there was such a change in his health. And, we really knew that. And there, it was, I tell the same stories all the time, but my reference for those kind of things were in science fiction. So nowadays you look, even this, people might tune into your thing and they would have a reference for what to do with what happened to them. I really had no reference. A few years later, I met this person who was a Sufi sheikh, and he started talking about what happens after we die, and I became very interested in that. So I read the Tibetan Book of the Dead and, more traditional religious books about dying and stuff like that.
And do you have a fear of death at all, or do you now?
I don't. I didn't. I was in my early 20s, so it was like, you don't even think about that. I definitely don't. My dad's 89 and he's super healthy. So I said, I have good genes, and I don't want to be suffering, but even now I start to say it, there's part of me that starts lifting out of my body and connecting to that beautiful thing. And then it's like, whoa, that, because part of me thinks, yeah, maybe I'll go there right now.
Yeah. Wow. You talked about how you offered to pray for somebody and that they made a difference and that you feel your hands getting warmer.
Yeah.
So are you happy to share a little bit around what your spiritual beliefs are? Do you believe in a particular belief system? Do you?
Well, I believe in, I do, well, I don't know. It's always interesting to answer that because, there are spiritual beings. Pretty much all the saints from all the religions are real, and they are there. I was born Jewish. I also, when I met the Sufi sheikh who's Islamic, I learned a lot about Islam. I've also learned a lot about Christianity, and those are the ones I know the most. But I've studied Hinduism, Buddhism. Buddha's a spiritual, all these spiritual masters, and as I'm talking, there's all these beings coming around to support this, which is cool. So, but I do think that Jesus Christ is sort of the head of the triangle on the planet at this time, and that doesn't mean anything less of anyone else. And, when I work with people, especially if they're stuck, it usually one tradition or another, but it's not even the tradition, it's one master or another. So there are masters in the Jewish, Abraham is a very high master, Buddha, very high master, so sort of, but again, I don't even know how to put these things into words. So it's open to this thing. And when someone says, oh, it's only this, that's not what I experience. It's sort of all the religions put together. But even I talk about Islam, it's not about killing people and doing, Islam is the real heart of it is an incredibly loving tradition. So is Christianity, so is Judaism, so is, Hinduism and Buddhism and all the others. So.
I really like the way that you've worded that, because what I've learned from doing these interviews and from the many people that I've talked to, and even from my own experiences, what it comes back to is any one belief system is too restrictive for what we've experienced. So I really love the way that you worded that. As you were talking there and you were saying, oh, there's all these beings and people coming around you to support this conversation.
There's these things are, I'm seeing them in the air. They're sort of opaque-ish. Sometimes, like when I see people that passed away, they look as solid as real physical people. Yeah. Sometimes it is just seeing things in my internal vision. So, but I've learned that they're real, because sometimes things, when I do healing, something happens. It is really amazing, and it's very cool.
Can you connect with them? Can you communicate in any way?
I think the answer is yes, but I'm not sure what you mean. A lot of times it's not so specific as this just movement of, even that there's like this, a lot's happening now. My heart's just really moving and opening up. And sometimes I do get very specific information about people. A lot of times it's a general movement of where they should be at or where they could be at. And it's sort of like within what their destiny or their karma or whatever you would call that, there's a range of things that could be within there, and they might be in the most unpleasant one, and they could be in a more pleasant one, even though it's on the same path. It's a little bit different in how to get them there. I say sometimes, a lot of times I get very specific information about people. Sometimes the silliest little thing of, I can't even think of something, but people are talking, and I'm trying to think of telling different stories in other interviews, but one time there was this thing about ice cream, and there's a voice that talks to me. I don't know who the voice is from, and that is frustrating. But a lot of times I don't know who's helping me. I don't know the names of them, actually. So, but this voice starts to say ice cream, and I was talking to a woman, nothing to do with ice cream. There would be no way to connect what I was talking to her about with ice cream, and the voice just says ice cream, then ice cream, then says ice cream, and then it says just say ice cream, just say ice cream. And usually I've learned to listen before that. So I said to the woman, I said, excuse me, I'm being told to talk to you about ice cream. And she just sort of started laughing and crying at the same time, because she had a fight with her boyfriend about ice cream in the morning. And
wow.
It's kind of a fun, cute little story,
Yeah, that is really cute. I love that. And so does this happen quite a lot, where you get voices or words for people?
Yes, it comes in different ways of sometimes seeing things in my inner vision. Sometimes it's just like knowing something. Sometimes it is hearing something, yes.
And that's come about since your experience?
Yeah, and some of it is I studied with a lot of people. I often say the one thing that really happened, I needed to be on a spiritual path after that. Just like everything is about that. Every interaction with everyone, even, I'm a parent. My parenting is about that. Everything is really this wonderful thing in everyone. It's like, you got to support that. And you got to, there's something about, then there's a super wonderful thing over there that I would call God, that people are trying to connect to. And there's just this movement in me and being around me that gets people to do that.
Oh, that's beautiful. You talked, you said you saw I think it was your grandfather in a movie.
Grandfather, yes. Yeah. Oh no, he was in the movie theater. I was there to see a movie in New York City, and we were sitting over here with some friends, and I walked by this person, and my grandfather was very unique. He was, very tall, 6'3" or something, 4, and very big guy, 300 plus pounds, and he always wore a super nice suit, a cowboy hat, and cowboy boots, and there would be no way mistaking someone else for him. And I just walked by and was like, I saw him, and I think about it, I was kind of naive to not even think that it was so strange, And
you didn't try and talk to him, or?
I didn't, it was kind of like, right, well, maybe now I would if I'm more comfortable with it. But I also know now I can connect to things spiritually. So, he was a very abundant person, very loving, just a joy to be around. And so I know he came to say goodbye to me because I wasn't like around when he passed away physically.
Wow, that's amazing. I think I'd probably jump out of my skin a little bit if that happened to me.
That's the thing. It's like, I mean, now it seems almost normal, but then I didn't even make any. I was with my brother and I said to him, "Did you see Pop in the front row?" He just said no, and I just, said, "Well, I don't know what happened," So.
Yeah, interesting. It must have been just for you at that time or something. Yeah. I want to go back to your near-death experience because the last thing you said was you were outside of your body, you're in this white light, and you could see all around you. There were two beings behind you. One was a big one and one was a little one.
Well, when I spent time studying with the Sufi sheikh, and he surprisingly would talk to me about Jesus and Mary and the love and openness of Mary for the Christ energy to come through her. That was that described the feeling, and that he would talk about the ocean of divine love and benevolence. And I was like, wow, that's the white light I was feeling. And when he talked about Jesus, I go, oh, the small being behind me was Jesus, and the big being was God, basically. So, but those words came later, and it just a very feeling. I'm still very kinesthetic, even when I'm working with clients. I know things, and I still sometimes I don't know what to say to them. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but when I say that to people, they go, "Oh, I get it," right away, because everyone has an experience of this thing that's bigger than them.
So when you're talking about your clients, when people come to you for help, what sort of things are they looking for, and how do you help them?
Well, I mostly work on the phone or via Skype for people in other countries. All sorts of things. I mean, anything. There's I have a client now who used to be a client a long time ago, and she was a great success story because she came to me. I used to have an office in Manhattan. She was very depressed, in a really bad space, and basically there was this guy she really loved, and he wasn't mean to her in any way, but he could have been nicer, let's say. And he at the time wouldn't even see her, and all her friends, her psychologist, her psychiatrist, telling her, "You got to get away." And I could see in her karma that she was not going to be getting away from this guy. And so I said, "You need to change your strategy, get it together and get this guy." And she did, and that they're married, and they don't live in Manhattan anymore. But so I don't know, a few months ago, she got back in touch with me, and they had lived someplace that was not a terrible area, but they thought it was going to get much nicer, and it just went downhill. And she was just struggling a real lot. Her husband at the time was really struggling, and so I just talk to her and tell her what I see. I clear off the negative energy that I see, the negativity, and they're not poor by any means, so they have more than one residence or more than one home. But where they have to live because of his work is this area that was sort of going downhill, and they couldn't really afford to move to a nicer area because of the situation. And she kept saying, "There's no way to find a nicer place for, this amount of money." I said, and I knew she was going to find a place. I said, "You have to look." And she kept saying, "No, there's no way." And, I said, "You got and I can say to her, just trust me," because she's had a lot of good experience. She goes, "I do trust you. I'm going to do it." She happened to meet some realtor who some guy needed to rent out his place. And, for basically they moved to a much nicer place that was cheaper than this place. And just other things happened where he was drinking a lot and he stopped drinking, and their life just really got way better within a few months. It's kind of funny because I was saying to her, "Now you have to practice being happy." She goes, "Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm so used to not being happy." And so but some people come with physical things, some people with business stuff. Recently there's someone who was out of work for quite a while and heard about me through a friend, and he contacted me, and even during quarantine time he got a job, and it almost seemed like, how did you get a job with this company like during this time? Like, who's hiring? But he got a really good job. It was kind of cool. Sometimes physical things, it's when I get rid of the negative things around people as much as you can, and then line them up with this thing inside of them that really knows and is really wonderful, and then connect it to this thing outside of them. And I'm using these vague words because it is, anytime we pin it down in our words, it's not as big as it really is. So just cool things happen. Someone called me not too long ago with their little baby, I don't remember how old she is, was really suffering, just crying all night long. And so I just checked what I see spiritually, and this person was blaming it on someone. I go, no, it's not. It's something to do, with someone else. And I could just see what, there's karma. Usually, a lot of times there's things from other lifetimes, and then when you can clear that. So when I can see it, it means it's up to the surface to clear. There's something in our consciousness that it's like wants to learn that lesson so much it almost holds on to the bad things, because part of us is choosing to do that. But when it gets to a certain level, it's like, oh, then you can get that thing off there. And so with this it's not a little baby, I would say a toddler. So once that past life was cleared, she was still crying some at night, but not like this scary crying through the whole night thing. So
wow, I find that so interesting. It's such an amazing work that you're doing, and I know you could help a lot of people.
I think it's so cool. And,
it is so cool.
Isn't it? Yeah.
So do you think that you would have ever, because I know you said that you had some abilities or some, what is the word? You felt some connection to spirit before your near-death experience.
Yeah. Well, I had intuition. I wouldn't say spirit because I would never even think of that. I was more of a math and science kind of person who, in a certain way, looking back, and I was thinking, I'm all this and that when those things happen. But I can look back and see the path from my life, and that, the near-death experience was just like a really big kick in the butt. And I've had other things in my life, so a friend of mine once said, spirit will whisper to you, and if you don't listen, talk a little louder, and then talk a little louder, and then knock the door down. And you want to listen before spirit knocks the door down. So there's been times in my life when I haven't listened until the door got knocked down, and my near-death experience was one of those. It's an ongoing experience, and it's always more about learning about myself and how I hold myself back, and there's always challenges in the world that there's a spiritual learning involved with it. Now, I do think, some years ago when I was teaching a class at the University of Bridgeport, which is in Connecticut in the United States, and I was teaching like a meditation class, and after the class, the woman told me she was going to have a class on death and dying, and I said, oh, I had a near-death experience. I really hadn't thought about it in a long time, and she was like so excited. And so she asked me to go teach at another class, like just as a guest lecturer, not ongoing teaching. And she said, yeah, a class on death and dying. So I went there, and I posted something on Facebook saying, oh, I'm going to teach this class. And so many people were interested, and it just rekindled all the spiritual things I learned about studying death, really. And it, it just seemed like, wow. And it's nice to find the community of near-death experience people and people that are interested in it, because even though I was doing this cool healing work and teaching meditation and stuff, it still was a part of my life that I didn't really share, because it is so mystical and magical. And there's the, I would do the breathing and meditation sort of partially because it's really helpful, and I did my doctoral treatise on a breathing exercise, but it was a way to reach out to people that might be interested in my work. But this is a much bigger way, because these are the people that are really interested in the work. And but it's great. It's great to have this and talk about it. And like I said, my reference when this happened was watching Star Trek or things like that. There was nothing in the world really. So it's great.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. That's just beautiful. Dr. Laurence Brock, thank you so much.
You're
It's
welcome.
just been
Thank
lovely.
you.
I feel so empowered.